Let's hear a remarkable story because from a life of crime as a burglar, a car thief, a drug addict for more than 15 years to helping others in need, Tony set up the Woodley charity Hope and Vision in December of last year, in the midst of a pandemic no less, to try and provide safe accommodation for those leaving drug addiction treatment. The organisation is now looking for new sites in which to help people. So we thought we'd hear Tony's remarkable story alongside the judge who sentenced Tony, who's a now trustee for his charity, Peter. We'll come to him in a moment. But first of all, welcome to the show, Tony. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Hi, Sarah.
Let's start at the beginning with all of this then, because you've been on quite the journey. What kind of prompted you stepping into a world of crime then? What was that kind of overwhelming factor?
I think I've always had a struggle with authority, whether that developed in my childhood with my parents, my dad in particular, healthcare providers, school, and that developed into the police, probation, the courts, and the prison service as well. So I didn't know how to communicate to people in authority, and I had a real struggle with that. I mean, I lost my dad at an early age, and to cope with difficult feelings, drugs and alcohol were my coping strategy.
Right. And how old were you then when you first were convicted of a crime? How young are we talking?
I got into the lifestyle. I was 12 years old. I mean, I didn't ever feel accepted, and in my lifestyle, I was sort of seeking acceptance through associates and that lifestyle. But I didn't actually get arrested and go to prison until I was 21. So my first offence, I ended up in prison, and at that point, my life took a turn for the worst. And yeah, it was a revolving door, in and out of prison for the next 15 years.
And what kind of crimes are we talking about here?
There was drug crimes, so possession and supply and those kind of offences. But as my life spiralled out of control, it turned to theft and burglaries, and yeah, it was a hopeless position to be in. I couldn't really see a way out.
And I guess by the sounds of things, it was drugs that underpinned it all. It was that drive to get money to what sustained the drug habit.
Yeah, I'd say the drugs were actually a solution to my problem. The problem wasn't actually the drugs. The problem was me and my ability to have relationships with other people. Being able to identify love, accept love, and give love. I didn't know what love was, and I wasn't placed in an environment where I was able to develop and practice that in my life.
So what kind of release did the drugs give you then? What were you getting from them? Because it was clearly something that in your mind at the time was worth holding on to.
Acceptance and belonging, I suppose, and that sense of warmth and love. Like heroin in particular, when you use heroin, gives you a warm sensation of being held and cared for, which is completely synthetic and not real. So my struggle with authority and being in prison, those environments are not really helpful to recovery and to rehabilitation as a whole, really. So it's a very fearful environment to be in, and you can't really reach a level of authenticity to really get to the root of the problem and heal the trauma, heal the pain, and heal what really is the problem. And I think a lot of people in prison today have got a multitude of problems. It's not the crime. I think there's mental health, there's addiction, there's all these underlying problems that need treating. The person needs treating, not the crime, I think.
Yeah. So what broke the cycle for you then? Because if we're talking about a 15-year cycle of being convicted of crimes, going into the prison, coming back out again, committing another crime, going back inside. What was it that brought that to a halt in the end?
Ironically, so my trust and my faith in authority has not been good. My experience of authority has always let me down. So ironically, I was at a really dark place in my life. I mean, I'd been stabbed a couple of times. I'd given up hope. So to be given an opportunity, call it grace if you would, to be delivered grace from a position of authority softened my heart really to develop a relationship and trust in authority again. And that comes from Peter. He gave me an opportunity to go to a rehab again, because I've been to many, but I had the opportunity to go to Yeldle Manor, and I really done some work on myself there.
Right, that's really interesting. So the judge that basically sent you into rehab brought an end to this cycle. We're going to come on to talk to him in a moment and get his take on this. That's a really interesting perspective, though, and we'll come on to talk about what it is that you've gone on to do with that since you've come out of there. So more to come from Tony and from Peter in a second. Bring Tony's story this afternoon. So Tony entered into a 15-year cycle, really, of drug addiction, committing crime, being convicted of those crimes, ending up in prison, just in a cycle that never seemed to end. But it has come to an end with the help of Judge Peter Ross. And we're hearing Tony's story about how he went on to set up the Woodley charity Hope and Vision. More on that in a moment. But let's just have a word with Peter now. And Peter, talk to me about how you first became aware of Tony, really, and what part you played in this journey.
Tony came before me at Oxford Crown Court probably 7 years or so ago. He'd committed a series of commercial burglaries, ended with a terrible police car chase in a stolen vehicle, and I sent him to prison. Very shortly after he was released, he offended again, another commercial burglary, this time of a shop, Superdrug in Witney. And I had quite a lot of experience of dealing with drug-related offending over my 16 years or so on the bench. And I realized with Tony that the revolving door that he so eloquently spoke about simply was not going to deliver the change that was necessary. Now, bear in mind, 95% of acquisitive crime in England and Wales is committed by those who have drug and alcohol addictions. And I just decided that something different had to be done. Now, in all fairness to Tony, he is too modest to mention that he found the place at Yeldle himself, and they offered him a scholarship there. And when I was presented with this as the sentencing judge, I just thought to myself, I've got to try something different here. And although it was a risk, I thought it was a risk worth taking. And so I sentenced Tony to a period of rehabilitation with a requirement that he live at Yeldle and go through what is a rigorous program there. And he absolutely flew. He did brilliantly there. So that's how I came across Tony, and that's how he responded to the sentence. And I always say to defendants, or I did when I was still a judge, I may give you the chance, but whether you take it is a matter for you. And those who take it, they deserve the credit, not the sentencing judge.
How unusual is it for you to follow up on someone that you're sentencing in this way? Because I guess in many ways, when you're working as a judge, there's a kind of constantly revolving cycle of people who are before you, who you decide, what will become of them, essentially. I guess it's not so often that you find out months, years later even, if it worked.
Well, that's not entirely true, because when judges impose drug treatment orders, the offender returns to the court every month during the course of the order for a review of progress. Now, I have had a reputation over my time up to my retirement for making considerable numbers of drug treatment orders. And my review courts were apparently unique. And at Oxford, we had what is still, as I understand it, a unique approach to the drug reviews, where we have both drug workers and probation officers, as well as the offender in court. And it's all very informal. And so one gets the opportunity to really get into how an offender is doing in terms of responding to the order you've made. What is, of course, unusual is for someone like Tony then to approach the sentencing judge later and say, I've got an idea. And bear in mind that it is the crises in life post-rehabilitation that are most likely to bring about a relapse into drug use. And one of the major crises that we face is homelessness amongst ex-offenders, recovering addicts. And there's a lot of research that shows that if you can give someone a home, just think about it for a moment, all your listeners, how important home is. The sense of security it gives you, the sense of worth it gives you. Now, if you can provide that to offenders, A, you remove the crisis, and B, you provide a stable basis for continued rehabilitation. So when Tony came to me with this idea, it just seemed to build on so much of what I'd been trying to do during the course of my career as a judge. And it's a very, as a career, it's been very odd in a sense. I've had this real interest in the rehabilitation of offenders with drug problems and alcohol problems, whilst at the same time dealing with major organised crime. I dealt with the last 3 of the big Oxford grooming cases. So it's a real mix of work that judges like me did. And I've been retired now since last autumn. And it seemed to me when Tony came to me that this was a very worthwhile project to support. I never quite thought I'd end up as the chairman of trustees, but there we are.
Yeah, life has a funny way of coming full circle in some ways, not necessarily ending up where you thought you were going to. Tony, coming back to you, I mean, this vision that you had, this idea, is what is now the charity Hope and Vision. The idea is that it provides safe accommodation for those leaving drug addiction treatment. What was it that made you want to do that? Did you see the value in that as providing a kind of base for people who are coming out of drug addiction treatment on which they could build, I suppose?
Yeah, so Hope and Vision Communities was an idea. I was coming to the end of my time on the programme. It was quite, like Peter said, an extensive programme. It was 2 years. But whilst I was in the Move On house, I had a fear or an anxiety of what was next on my life, and I also had a fear of I didn't want to go back to the life I was living, where I come from, you know. And through that process of treatment, I learned that one, environment is very important, a safe, loving environment, like Peter said, a family environment, and relationships are very important too, and the building of community and people working together, and that's been developed over a period of time. To then for it come to an end is quite intimidating. And as an addict, I've got these learned behaviours, these coping strategies that I return to when things get difficult. So I thought, some people need help. People like me need help to move on into the community, onto independent living and new life, because I was a broken person. I've been transformed and I have got new life today. And part of my recovery is to be of service to other people today. And I thought, how best to implement that into my life other than to give back to the community that I've really harmed in a big way. So it's a way of making amends for my past. It's a way of being of service to other people, and to pluck up the courage to ask Peter to stand with me in this journey. I think I think is a powerful demonstration of the relationships required.
Yeah, but I mean, also just I suppose it as you've already alluded to there. You know, it's given you a bit of a coping mechanism as well. So it's kind of a win-win situation. I know you're doing brilliant work in trying to raise money for more sites to help people in their ongoing drug addiction treatment recovery. Best of luck with it. It's lovely talking to both of you on the show this afternoon. That's Tony Attwood and Peter Ross. That charity is called Hope and Vision.